My job as a CRO is to make the CEO successful, period.
Today we finally sit down with the one and only Dan Fougere. Dan is a sales powerhouse, having played a pivotal role in not just one, not two, but 4 billion-dollar IPOs. In this episode, we dive deep into what it takes to build a world-class go-to-market strategy.
I say this to founders, you should feel just as proud of your go-to-market team as you do of your engineering team.
The crucial role of mentorship.
He said 0 words to me. I just saw how he acted and lived his life, and I got instantly better.
What separates good sales from truly great sales?
It's like playing a sport. The more you go through these experiences, the more pattern recognition you see, and the more you can start to recognize, okay, this is how it's done.
And the key mistakes founders make when scaling their sales teams.
If you hire that leader and they spend all their time building Salesforce, you got the wrong person.
This is his playbook.
This episode is sponsored by PGAI and Seller. Go and discover how these solutions can help amplify your sales execution. Check out the descriptions below.
You guys kind of tricked me into this podcast because I called you trying to get you to be able to work with a startup or two that I'm advising that needs help. And then through some very savvy maneuvering, somehow you guys convinced me to do the podcast. So congratulations on that. It might only work every 5 years, but it is effective. The other thing I wanted to say before we get started is I'm 54 years old, and sometimes I feel young and sometimes I feel old. And last night I injured my foot sleeping. And I woke up today, I was like, I just sprained my foot sleeping. What in God's name is happening to me? So we've got to do this podcast before I just become so old that nothing works anymore. So, all right, let's freaking talk about some software stuff. Are you guys ready or what?
Yeah, it's a great start. I think we've got a wrap right there, to be honest with you.
So Simon, you asked me how many IPOs I've been a part of. I went to PTC, Parametric Technology Corporation, in 1995. I had been an expert user of the product as an engineer. And I thought that it was so amazing. I went to go work at that company. I didn't realize that company was kind of like the genesis of, this lineage of amazing sales leaders that you guys ended up doing this. You did your, the 33 CXOs or CROs that worked for John McMahon. So when I joined PTC, John had an amazing reputation. He was already a legend, but he wasn't the head of sales yet. So he was just in the Northern California office. He created that culture there. And just as he was leaving, I went there as an engineer and to the Mountain View, California office in 1995. And in that office were Carlos Delatorre, Jim Drill, Dave Boyle, all just like this dazzling talent, exciting. That they were the people who convinced me to move from engineering into sales. So long answer, the company was doing about 200 million a year, still had that startup DNA. And I always wanted to be part of like a Silicon Valley startup. So the first time I left PTC in 98 after 3 years of getting hammered into shape by some very incredible but unforgiving leaders, which was for my own good. And I went to a company called Actuate in 1998, went public in that summer. And we did web reporting. And so there was this whole thing happening in 1998 called the World Wide Web. And very few, we competed with companies that were Cognos and Business Objects and companies like that. I stayed with them for a while and I moved to London and I wanted to do another one. And I knew I needed to get better. So I purposely sought out the PTC crew again, because I knew that I could kind of fake it and just keep kind of finding other companies, but I knew I wasn't getting the kind of, mentoring and guidance that I needed to become a great leader. So Carlos Delatorre told me he was going to this company, BladeLogic, and I should talk to John. And I ended up talking to McMahon, and then I was living in London at the time, and I flew over to Boston, met with John, saw they were having a sales meeting, and I just saw like the quality of the people there was impressive. I met David Etcheria, who at the time was the founder and CEO of BladeLogic. I heard Steve Walski was on the board as the chairman. Steve was the CEO of PTC. So I was like, okay, it's going to be the toughest environment, but I think it's going to be the best thing for me. And so went to BladeLogic, and that at BladeLogic, you have Adam Aarons, Cedric Pesch, Jeremy Duggan, Carlos Delatorre, Scott Davis, Paul McGrath, Andy Byron, Luca Lazzarone also was there, Brian Blond. This was the table in my first sales leadership meeting, and John and Dave. And I was like, holy shit, like I don't even deserve to be here, right? And these guys are all so incredibly talented. I think we all kind of inspired each other to get better. And it was actually a really amazing environment to improve. We went public that year. In like 2008, I believe. And then we got acquired by BMC. 2011 or 12, I go to Medallia because Doug Leone was on the board of Sequoia. He was Sequoia, but he was on the board. Steve Walski was on the board. And so I wanted to, again, be around the best people. And that company, Scott Davis and I built the sales methodology, the messaging, the forecasting. I was personally involved in all the key deals in the beginning, figuring out how to sell that. That company ended up going public after I left to go to Datadog. So I went to Datadog at the end of 2016, and just so happens that Medallia and Datadog both went public within a couple months of each other at the end of 2019. So I have had the good fortune of being involved in 4 IPOs of $1 billion or more.
You look at your background, and I think the first thing that really jumps out is the fact that you have made good choices along the way. And is that firstly by design, or is that just what is it that helped you make those good choices, Dan?
I have always sought out mentors and people to learn from. And I wanted to run towards the hardest stuff. I know some people who are very smart people who went to great schools who thought, oh, I'll go to this job because I'll be a big fish in a small pond, or I think it's an easy way for me to make some money. And honestly, I didn't make like as much money along the way. And I know this is true for McMahon as well, that like along the way, I wasn't optimizing for the biggest paycheck. I was trying to optimize for learning and for being with the best people and, being pushed to grow and get better. And at the same time, also trying to be places where there was going to be a big outcome. And I think that one of the mistakes, maybe over the past few years, there's been a vilification of people trying to make a lot of money. And I think that's really silly. This is the scoreboard for us, right? It's so the scoreboard is the money, and the game really is to maximize valuation for the companies. There are a number of companies out there where the founders don't want an exit. That's their fiefdom, right? That's their project, that's their baby, and that's perfectly fine. That's wonderful. I have so much respect for founders. My favorite people. I would have nothing if it wasn't for software founders. At the same time, I wanted to make sure I was lined up with people who wanted to have exits. And I think each one of those, so Actuate was an Excel company, Datadog was Iconic and Index, and Medallia was Sequoia. And so these are all firms that they win almost all the time, right? And they've done it for a long time, and that's not by accident. Amongst other firms like that, the smartest, hardest working, they know what they're doing. And so that's not by accident either.
I want to take this moment to ask you very kindly to go and subscribe to our channel. Only 5% of the people viewing our content are actually subscribed. So to ensure that we keep doing what we do, bringing you the very best guests in the industry, please go and hit that subscribe button for us. Thank you so much for listening, and we hope you enjoy this show.
So, Dan, just for the records, obviously you joined Datadog February 2017 and you left June 2021. What was the state of the organization when you joined, and where did you get it to in those 4.5 years?
I think another thing about when you ask about career path is as you prove yourself at different levels in the hierarchy, so starting with an individual contributor, moving to a first line leader, then moving to second line, et cetera. And then, so you're proving yourself at each of those. And to me, if you're going to be a a CRO, if I'm talking to founders and VCs, like when you think about who should you be looking at, I would not personally hire somebody who has not proven success at each of those levels. Just like in engineering, right? If you haven't been able to develop, this part of the product, why would I give you the whole thing? And so, but as you do that, and as the companies you're at become more progressively, successful, larger outcomes, et cetera, you earn the right to go to companies further down the road as far as maturation, valuation, et cetera. So at that point, Scott Davis at Medallia had part of his leadership genius, I think, is to allow people to, do what they expand what they do. And he's not threatened by that. And he let me do a ton of stuff at Medallia. So by the time I showed up at Datadog, I was relatively fully formed and proven. And so that's part of, I think, why the founders at Datadog and the board had the confidence to let me have the job. The company was doing, the day I started, I think we ticked to 60 million ARR. And they had built something amazing, which, a lot of people know the story, but, I talked about it recently, is that the mythology that I think is damaging is that the software sold itself, and it's kind of true, but mostly not true, because what existed was a really amazing business and with one product, infrastructure monitoring, and almost entirely sold to other software startups who were born in the cloud, almost entirely month to month, almost entirely credit card deals, 100% entirely inbound. And that's the model, and that's the model that worked. And they could have just kept going with that. But again, I just always can never speak highly enough of the founders. And I include Amit Agrawal as one of the founders, I talk about it just to make it easy, is that they realized, hey, yes, we have this amazing tailwind. They were growing 100% year over year already. They could have just kept doing that, and they would have still had a great outcome, but it would not have been to the scale that we ended up making it. And so there were probably 40 people in the sales organization when I started. There was a small team of enterprise. There was like 5 or 4 sales reps and 1 leader. The enterprise team was not clicking. But the commercial team, they were processing orders that were inbound. It was kind of they were cleaning the fish that were jumping in the boat. They were not really fishermen. And so part of my job, or actually everything, I created a deck, and when I won the job, and it was going to be outbound, enterprise, international, channel, sell value, accurate forecasting, qualification, and a culture of excellence. And that's what I said I would do. And that's what I worked on for the 4.5 years I was there.
This episode is sponsored by Seller. Seller provides a white glove treatment to every complex deal with their bespoke system, whilst ensuring you get the most value from your CRM for everyday selling. It is an amazing story, and obviously there was a remarkable outcome, and history tells that story of how you went in, and obviously it wasn't a straightforward process to go and drive those changes. How reluctant were the founders at that time? Were they ready to make that change, or was it a constant process to get them to align that this is the way we need to go if we want to get the big outcome?
I had to show value. I had to, and this is another thing that with my advice to anybody getting a CRO role at a hot company like this with incredibly smart founders who have created something already awesome is to don't mess up the thing that's already working and go create the things that don't exist. And that was one of their concerns was, yes, we know you're going to implement forecasting methodology, qualification methodology, sales process, but don't artificially insert that into a high velocity, low friction sales model that we already have for the SMB market. And so that I was very, very conscious of that. And so I did not jump in and say, this is what we did at BladeLogic and we're going to do this here. I've seen leaders do that. It doesn't go so well sometimes. It's like respect the things that got the company there before you got there, and over time, you'll be able to figure out how to make improvements on that, but learn from that to then go build the channels and components that don't exist yet.
There is a real difference between what good sales is and other sales. But if you'd never known what you know, how would founders, how would salespeople that perhaps have been in substandard sales organizations understand the difference of what great sales is and the impact great sales could have compared to conventional?
You've got two things here. One is the sales part, which is we are selling. How do we actually, like on the unit of revenue creation perspective, what does excellence look like for that function, which is engage a prospective customer, change their minds, convince them of something that they were not already thinking, get to the power in the organization, get access to funds, close the deal, make the customer successful, right? That's the selling part. And then there's the leadership part, which is recruit amazing people, build a hierarchical structure that works and scales and is efficient and has good CAC and magic number, but yet still also gives the individual contributors the support that they need to ramp, and be able to scale. And then the operational part, which is going to be forecasting, qualification, sales process, and building all of that, which to me needs to be bespoke. It's almost like if you get Seville Row, right? Or if you guys go, if you get a custom suit, sometimes they'll build it from scratch, but not really. Usually there's going to be a template already. I think that's how the leader should be thinking about it, is that there's a template. Yes, you're bringing it from your previous experience, but then you need to customize it to fit the person, and in this case, the company. And so when I think about that, and for founders, these are generally iconoclastic people. Their success emanates from their inherent perspective that they can do things differently and better. And they're mostly right, because that's why they have a successful company. And so, yes, and some of these things that, like the stuff I just mapped out, this is not something that's going to be like, oh yeah, we're going to just make up a whole new way of doing all those things. This is some stuff. It's about the way humans engage with each other and do business and make decisions. And this is some stuff that one of my mentors at PTC said is Egypt old, right? That this is just human nature. It was true 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago. It's going to be true 1,000 years from now. And it's not in books. You can't look up on ChatGPT, how do I, create a great sales organization? You can actually learn how to code in Python, that way, like by yourself reading a book. You can learn to, build an application, but you can't really learn how to do those things from a book. As far as I can see, right, that you have to have gone through that, and the number of at bats. It's like playing a sport. Like you have to go through hundreds of deals and tens of quarters and hire hundreds of people. And the more you go through these experiences, the more pattern recognition you see, and the more you can start to recognize, okay, this is how it's done. And it's almost like this more of a tribal knowledge that you get through experience. And then the other thing is, it helps you, like Malcolm Gladwell wrote that book a while back about, like, you have 10,000 hours to have mastery. And then you can, I think he called it thin slicing, where an expert can recognize very quickly, like, this. And so the other thing, I had a really smart founder at one of the hottest companies right now. I spoke with him a couple weeks ago, and he said, this is a controversial question, but why do I even need a head of sales? I thought that's an amazing question. That's the kind of question that Olivier would ask me, because you're getting back to first principles. And I said to him, I think, yes, you can learn this. Like any founder, these are, super high IQ people. Like, of course you can learn this. It might take you like 4 or 5 years, right, to get enough experience. Or you can get someone like me involved, and I can tell you the answers, generally speaking, mostly right, I hope, within like seconds or minutes, or maybe I need to think on it for a couple days. And now, right out of the gate, by working with someone like me, I can help you make better decisions more quickly while you're building the product and building the company and all those things.
Dan, your position now is helping a lot of startups, working within the VC community and helping startups, with their go-to-market from, definitely from an advisory perspective, right? When you've got an organization or a founder that is reluctant over sales and that is a bit resistant on resisting some of the idea of building out a sales organization, the cost implications, and what is your process of education around the importance of good go-to-market to somebody that is resisting some of that information?
You maybe have two buckets, generally speaking. One is going to be a company that's the product is flying off the shelves, and that is happening today for a number of companies and has been happening for the whole past, I don't know, I mean, kind of like from that Datadog Snowflake era where some companies were on that path, growing 100% or more year over year, didn't have great sales. And I think that became like an inverse proof point to some of the things I was saying, at least during that time period. Because what I have seen with some of these companies, obviously, which I will not name, is that they were growing 100% year over year. They did not get this religion. And that one move that they had, this PLG inbound viral going, they did not bring in a great CRO. They did not do what I'm talking about. And then that stopped delivering the same level of growth. They're still growing, but the rate of growth has diminished greatly, right? And I could kind of see this. I could, when I see the moves, the people that they're hiring, I can tell that this is probably going to happen. And so then you look at someone like Figma, brought on Sean Boscanian, tremendous, used to be our VP on my team. And so they even though they were growing so fast, they still had the foresight to hire a great CRO. Wiz hired BladeLogic, who's also great. And even though Wiz was already growing super fast, and Asaf and those guys are so smart, they brought on Dolly, and so to me, those are the right moves. I'll name the ones that I think are doing the right things. The ones that are not, you can they go from 100%, and then all of a sudden they're doing 40 or 30% growth, and they're wondering. And to me, if you're trying to just ride the product, it's like having one barrel of the shotgun instead of two, because I know, like at PTC, for example, the CEO of PTC said, we could swap out our product with one of our competitors and we would still win because our sales team is so good. And that was, I think a lot of things are cyclical. And when PLG happened, I think people were like, wow, look, we don't even need to have great sales. We can still grow. And that's true, like I said, but it's true maybe during certain time periods. And that's a time period, in my opinion, when you double down and you grow, I say this to founders, you should feel just as proud of your go-to-market team as you do of your engineering team. And if you do that, then someday something's going to happen. Like, for example, a few years ago when the rate changes caught up with all of us and Silicon Valley Bank failed and all the startups were banking with Silicon Valley Bank and, all the cash dried up. And so if your business was at that time largely reliant on software startups for your revenue, then you took a massive hit. And then maybe you had to do a down round, or maybe you had to do a kind of M&A that was not really what you wanted to do. But the companies, so for example, Datadog, who did have a significant software startup business and built out the great enterprise business, when that happened, they were able to cover the loss in the software startups with how good their enterprise business was. And so it's like Noah's Ark, right? If you actually been doing a lot of, been reading the Bible, just like for like just the lessons, like these are like, this stuff is just true. There's a reason it's lasted for like 10,000 years. And so the story of Noah is like, the flood is coming, it's a parable. And so we will get sick. something bad's going to happen. The source of your revenue is going to dry up. Your competition is going to catch up to you. These days, the pace of change and of innovation for software is so fast that your competition will catch up to you product-wise, or something is going to happen. And so why wouldn't you build fault tolerance into your revenue model and try to win with your go-to-market as well?
Thanks to our sponsor, Pipeline Generation AI, the platform that researches your top accounts, creates insights and assets to help you engage more effectively. Elevate your conversations and transform your pipeline with Pipeline Generation AI today. So Dan, obviously we see other scenarios also kind of where founders are looking to make hires, but they're hiring the wrong people. Now, the people they're hiring could have been very, very successful. They could have a proven track record, but they're just not the right fit. Maybe they're working for a larger organization, but the track record seems to be one of the biases that founders seem to make more so. And we do see it normally takes 3 attempts before they finally get it right. But how can they avoid that mistake? What advice would you be saying to that to help founders make the right choice of the right head of sales at the right time?
I've heard this before. I heard Carlos Delatorre talk recently on a podcast about calling it like a challenger. Somebody who has been, I don't know if this is what he was referring to, but there's a whole different, like when we were at BMC, the 4 years I spent at BMC, we got meetings with the CTO of JP Morgan, the CIO of Bank of New York. I was in New York. And so I could get meetings with all those companies and the C-level, C-suite. It's easy. Relatively speaking, when you're at a big company, IBM, Salesforce, Google, of course they're going to meet with you. They're already big customers. They want your banking business, right? It's a two-way street of value when no one's even bought any software. When you're at, a company with a weird animal name, or a company no one's ever heard of, then getting that meeting is super freaking hard. And also, when it's like, hey, we have a meeting. Who's going to put the deck together? Like, you are. So when you're at a startup, you have to do everything. Like, you got to book you got to get the data into Salesforce the first time. The company doesn't even have like an entry. I'm like typing in the phone number for the person who nobody knows exists. I'm learning the phone tree at Citibank and just guessing at people's numbers, trying to find my way in. So if you haven't been through that, and all of a sudden you're the head of sales of people who have to do that all day, I don't know how that works. I don't know if I've ever seen it work. If all you had was Oracle, Salesforce, Google, all great companies, just a totally different, sale and totally different type of hire and totally different job. And so this goes back to, I would personally only hire a CRO who has succeeded in all those steps up to the CRO. And if it's for a startup, they would have had to show me some sustained success in a startup environment, or else I would never hire them to lead a sales organization at a startup. You just haven't seen it before. There's always somebody who can be the, anomalous proof point against the generalization. But the reason the generalization exists is because it's mostly true all the time.
Is there a common conversation that you find yourself having again and again, or a common theme that you're seeing when you're working with founders in terms of maybe some of the pitfalls or some of the mistakes some of the things that you're grappling in? What would some of those be?
Probably number one is going to be talent, getting the right people on the team, whether that's a first hire for a role or upgrading people. That's one, and it also depends on the stage of the company, right? If it's the beginning, if it's like 10 million ARR or something less than that, or then it's some of these concepts. And by the way, those early days, they're doing amazing things, right? They're leading sales. They're figuring out how to sell the stuff. They're coming up with the messaging while also creating the product. Whenever they get to that place where, okay, we've got product market fit, we have there's replicable things that are happening. Let's step on the gas and scale. And so then in every step, again, their job is so hard. It's easy. It's almost easy for us to sit here and say, how come you didn't hire, I don't know, Jeremy Duggan or someone, Carlos Del Torre or Scott Davis? How come you didn't hire someone like that? Well, when you're at 5 million ARR, you can't, right? So you've got to figure out who's the best person I can get at that stage, and how can I work with them? And here's another thing I would say is that there are a handful of cases where the person who was the first rep or the first sales leader did eventually become the CRO. That's a rare person, and I believe pretty much everyone I know of that did it had some kind of board member or advisor, say like me, who's been there, done that, who could be the guide, be the Yoda to their Luke, right? So, it's like, hey, let's go to Dagobah and, practice our Jedi skills in the swamps. Like, you have to have somebody who's going to guide you on that journey to get there. Learning it on your own, I don't think I've ever seen it happen. So even if you do have that mentor or guide, board member, investor, advisor, someone who's got this kind of background, then the chances are that person is not going to be able to go from 0, 5, 10 to like 500, a billion or something, right? You're probably going to need to make a move. And so then in each of and once you get to that place, though, if it's like, I don't know, whatever, 20, 40 something million ARR, it's like, this thing is going to be something. Now you can go get somebody amazing. It's almost like the journey for the founders maybe is a similar journey of like, okay, I can't get someone who is like the world's best CRO now. I can get somebody who's the best fit for us right now, and knowing there's some chance, 5, 10%, that this person is going to be with us forever, and it's going to be one of the legendary stories. And then there's the 89% chance or 90% chance we're going to have to make a move at 20, 40, 50 million or something like that. And we're going to get the person who was already successful in a company like this before to come and build it out and scale it.
It's an interesting subject, and which is the right time to hire a CRO for an organization. In your opinion, when is the right time to hire a CRO?
I would try personally, generally, to avoid the title inflation. Because once it's a CRO, I guess you could call the person president or COO or something, and after that. But you kind of, if the job is sales, let's just say that's generally the highest title you're going to give them. So in the early days, it's easier to get somebody excited when they have a bigger title. But if you have that discipline to hold on and just call it VP of sales until it's time to, like, this thing is happening, step on the gas. Like, for example, when I went to Datadog, when I was interviewing in, say, November, December of 2016, the company was like 40, 50 million, doubling year over year. Those of us who have been down this road, you could see the pattern recognition is there. This could be one of the great ones for sure. Then, as you get earlier and earlier, it probably is more of like, I don't know. Let's see. Can we get a Dan Fougere in 2016 now? If so, get him. Sure. If you can't get the super high quality, ready for the job person, but you can get a great regional type leader. I would say this kind of generally for anybody, head of sales. So let's go pre-obvious hire CRO stage. Let's go earlier. I want somebody who's got the best years of their career ahead of them, not behind them. I want someone who's got tons of energy, who will be on a plane every week. I want somebody who's going to be the tip of the spear, leading from the front in the meetings all the time. I want somebody who is relentless in trying to hire awesome reps. So this person, even if they don't have all the other stuff like operational, like if you hire that leader and they spend all their time building Salesforce, you got the wrong person. I would rather have somebody forecasting in spreadsheets, but who is hiring awesome reps in the meetings with them all over the country or world, convincing customers to buy our stuff, closing the deals, energizing the team, Maybe they don't have some of the other stuff, their board presence isn't as good. They don't know how to, instrument the business. I don't care about that. I want pipeline generation, recruiting, driving the deals. Do that in those early days. That's the person you want. And as we get, more mature as an organization, and you start to see some of the cracks maybe where it's like, I need to know what the forecast is next quarter, like now. I need to have a hiring plan that makes sense. I need to know what the CAC is. I need to have the business instrumented. I need to be able to hire leaders of leaders. That's when you start to see some of the cracks with that kind of earlier stage sales leader who maybe can't do those things. And that's when you should get a CRO.
Dan, I actually want to go back to Datadog. And the reason I want to go back to Datadog is because obviously the success was well documented, but it couldn't have been just a linear upward curve for you where everything was great. So I'd like to understand, what were some of the biggest challenges? What were the difficult things that you really had to kind of grapple with that were there any moments where you thought, I don't know whether I'm going to be able to do this?
Every day. Yeah, it was super hard. For example, we had to build out an enterprise team before any enterprise companies had any applications in production in the cloud, right? And I say enterprise for anybody that's not like a born in the cloud software startup and like a legacy company of scale. And I had to recruit people, convince them to join. They had a $1.4 million quota or something along those lines. And at the time, I think our average sale price for the enterprise, we didn't even know. I mean, it just didn't exist. Eventually, it got to be like 100K, I think, or something in those early days. But in the beginning, we just didn't even have a baseline. And I had to tell them, hey, so for example, I hired some people from very prestigious sales organizations in a similar space who failed because they wouldn't stop calling on the monitoring people. You're like, well, Datadog's a monitoring company. Why wouldn't I call on the monitoring people? Because you guys just sold them a giant contract at your last company, and the last thing they want is more monitoring tools. And so this is the monitoring teams at companies, their mission was to stop Datadog from getting in. So we had to like do guerrilla warfare, like basically fly under the radar, do small deals that were pilots, and just to be able to get our foot in the door and start to really build the campaign from there. And so there were times we would do like a 20K ARR deal at a really big company, and the reps and the leaders like, Dan, like, how are we going to make any money? How are we going to make our numbers? I can't do 70 20K deals to make my number. And so that was hard. Then another thing was from the mindset for traditional selling was, especially in a pre-cloud world, was I would sell them as much software as I could up front. I would sell high to the CIO, and we had the opposite. Just get your foot in the door, sell low, and we would then try to drive a consumption business. And so that was a challenge. Also, from a comp plan perspective, we started to get into situations, and this is, some of this stuff has been figured out and some of that knowledge has been passed around the industry, but we had a situation where, say, the customer was Hulu or somebody like that, or Disney, and they committed to this much, and their consumption started to be up here. And so the traditional mindset of a salesperson would be, oh, I'm going to get them to commit, and then it's better for the company, right? Maybe not, because what does that customer think at that point? The customer thinks, well, you should give me a better unit price because I've just increased my commit. Actually, our revenue at that point included some penalties. This is the same as AWS, by the way. Like AWS really kind of, as far as I can tell, invented this, is that you're actually paying us more revenue than if we get a higher commit. So getting the higher commit, like getting them to commit at their current usage, or even the usage we know is going to happen, is not better for the company. And that's a hard thing to figure out the comp plan and to motivate the salespeople. And so we really had to push we had to iterate a few times on how to get the comp plans right. And I almost had a mutiny on my hands, because all these enterprise salespeople and leaders were used to making a lot of money, and they were used to that model. Oh, I'm going to get them to commit higher. Now I make my number. Like, actually, guys, we don't want to do that deal, because now the revenue for the company goes down because we just gave them a lower unit price. And so what'd you just do? You just got us less money. So that was a very hard needle to thread. So we were figuring this stuff out kind of as far as we could tell from the first ones, right? Maybe they were doing something similar to Snowflake. I haven't talked to those guys if they were doing the same thing over there. But I think Datadog, it was particularly hard because the founders were always committed to good unit economics. And to me, possibly because they had such a hard time raising money in the early days, because they were told by the VCs nobody could make a great software company in New York. Nobody wants another monitoring company. This whole cloud thing isn't going to take off. In my time there, we never spent any of the money that they had raised before I got there. So we did all that growth on the money we were making selling the software.
Wow.
And that's a phenomenal, incredible accomplishment. It's like a haiku, or it's like the constraints drive greater creativity. And so we were able to do this traditional amazing sales, but not by burning tons of cash. And so I think that's probably why so many people want to be the next Datadog of something, is because we were able to combine these two things. And that was my hope even going there, was that if we could bring these two things together, it'll make a whole new level of awesomeness in enterprise sales. Enterprise software.
Yeah. So Dan, obviously in those moments when the chips are down and things do get tough, how do you deal with that situation?
There's probably a couple things I would say. One is like how you take care of yourself and not burn out as a leader. And then the other is like, how do you engage in the C-suite and with your people so that you can still make hard decisions and not lose everybody and not end up with some sort of internecine fighting and battles inside that become like political and disruptive to the company's functioning. And so I'll do the personal stuff second. I actually have had a lot of success working with psychologists and coaches. My dad was a cop. I went to engineering school. I didn't even know what business people did. The first part of my life, I grew up in Queens. And then at age 13, we moved to the country, like right by Vermont, which is very rural. I worked on farms. So I didn't know anything about this stuff. So for me to be able to transform myself and become who I needed to become CRO of Datadog, I needed help. So, and even when I went to Datadog originally, the founders and some of these conversations were a little harder than I would like. I was a little worried that maybe the body would reject the new organ, and so which was me, and I didn't want to be rejected. So I got a coach, and I talked with her about, hey, Olivier and I just had this, the CEO and I just had this conversation. It didn't feel like it went very well. Okay. And then I realized, like, hey, I'm bringing baggage to this meeting, like unknowingly. I'm bringing like preconceived notions. I'm bringing of his motivations, of the way of why my idea is the only idea that works, and I just had to get rid of all that. And like, leave your ego at the door, leave your emotions at the door, and let's try to find the best answer. And the best answer may not be mine. And because these are incredibly smart people, and also he's the boss, right? And so my job as a CRO is to make the CEO successful, period. That's it. When we have a disagreement, I'm going to make my case. I'm going to be prepared for the meeting. I'm going to have data. And if he decides I want to do it a different way, then I'm just as committed to his way of doing it as I would have been to mine. Because also, like, if you're doing like a proof of failure, these people are too smart to figure that, they'll see right through it. And now your relationship is ruined. If the CEO is not smart enough to see that, then you got a bigger problem. And also, like, why would you want to, like, I would never do that. Okay, let's try this idea. And I would say there was probably some spread on this where 33% of the time they had a better idea, and I'm glad I tried it and I learned. 33% of the time my idea was better, but I gave their idea the best shot and we eventually iterated towards mine. And 33% of the time it was some hybrid of both. Once you get to that place and it's not like a personal thing and it's not about ego and emotion, you're going to have better ways to get to the answers. The other thing I would say, so going to the second dimension of this, is that don't wear yourself out. You're not going to get everything in your Maslow's hierarchy of human needs, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's not like work and then there's nothing else. That's not how it is. Like, if you can look it up online, ask ChatGPT to show it to you, right? So after you got your housing, clothing, you have to have some loving relationships in your life. You have to have friends. You have to keep yourself fit. You have to get sleep, eat right. And so, because the machine, if you take care of this machine, then this machine will take care of you. If you don't, then when you hit those high stress situations, which are going to happen, and they're going to happen, like I said, every day, then you're not going to be performing at your highest level, and now you have a downward spiral versus showing up the best version of yourself, ready to take on challenges and handle stress, and now you have a virtuous cycle up.
You're probably touching on some of these points now, Dan, but if you had a DeLorean time machine and you were to be able to go back and talk to Dan Fougere in 2017, the start of that journey at Datadog, is there any advice that you would give him, or is there any tips that you would give him because you now know what you know?
Well, first we need 1.27 gigawatts, and we need to go 88 miles an hour, and we got to be able to hook up to the clock tower. And so, if we could do all those things,
and you need a nutty professor,
yeah, exactly, Professor Brown.
Exactly.
Yeah, I would say a lot of the things I just said. Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of these things I learned really doing that job. I had a challenging exit from my previous role, and that caused a lot of stress in me. I've talked about a little bit about it before, but I didn't have enough money to exercise my shares. I had spent 4 or 5 years with the previous company. That was really like all of my potential wealth in the world at that point. And there was a risk of it turning into pixie dust. And I had, not gotten a role that I thought I was going to get. So, like, psychologically and emotionally, I was a little fragile going into that job. And then, then I was heading into an environment that was engineering, like, was the whole culture really at Datadog, and I think that's awesome and amazing. But it was also, I felt a little bit like not part of the A team, and so that just added to maybe like some of the fragility I felt, and so I would just tell that guy to chill and be more, probably have more confidence and be more relaxed about it. But it's hard to say because these are all like, these, hypotheticals are, it's fun to talk about, but if that guy wasn't as insanely laser focused and worried, maybe he wouldn't have done all the awesome things that he did to make this thing work, because a lot of people thought there was like a dead pool on, Datadog heads of sales at that point. I think they had gone through, I don't know what the number is, but 3 in the previous like few years or something. And so people were like, oh, they don't value salespeople. They thought it was maybe not the best place to go. So for me to be able to break through, maybe I needed to be that worried to constantly be trying to figure things out.
So Dan, obviously, I think what you're referring to there is obviously you had to go through the pain in order for you to kind of learn the lessons, and even though you were stressed, and even though it was hard, it was part of molding you to become who you are.
Yeah.
But along the way, you did have great mentors. You did have great support around you. Were there any kind of profound moments as part of that where maybe someone shared some wisdom with you and it kind of shifted a gear or really kind of moved the needle for you?
Yeah. Oh my God. I mean, it's a great question. I actually thought about writing all of these because, like first time when I went to BladeLogic and the first leadership meeting I went to, and this is something I think I want to talk about because I think the work from home thing that happened is really damaging to sales leadership, probably most roles in software, maybe less so in engineering. I don't know. I'm not expert enough to comment on that in particular, but certainly in sales and sales leadership, it was damaging because I think when the pandemic, when the lockdowns happened, and we've all thought that's what you had to have happen, say like 2020 pass, when nobody knew what the hell was going on. Thank God we had Zoom. But then after that, when people realized we got to get back to work, it should have been back to the office. And people can make up whatever excuses they want. It's all mostly, to me, self-serving because they want to walk their dogs. They want to take a yoga class at 11 a.m. on a Tuesday, none of which is value add to the company. If you think about how hard it is to build the product, sell the product, make the customer successful, anything anybody else does during their work hours diminishes the chances of having maximum success for the company. And the random interactions that you have with other people, and in this case, to answer your question, with more senior people or peers, who you could learn from in like the random walk of being in the office, I could almost give you an answer just all based on random interactions I've had with people in the office. And so I think that has probably had an impact on why we're seeing maybe there's a gap there with like first line and second line leaders in the enterprise these days, because they, for the past 4 or 5 years, haven't been learning as much from the more senior people and their peers, and even other people who maybe are less senior than them, but still are selling. And so to answer your question, like first time I went to a BladeLogic leadership meeting, I went to the gym. I hadn't been in the gym in a while. I thought I was ahead of the game, and I was there at 6:30 in the morning, and John McMahon was already full of sweat, and so I was like, this guy he's older than me. He's got more kids than me. He's got a bigger job than me. And he's in better shape and was up earlier than me. And I was like, oh man. And so then when the meeting started right at 8 a.m., the meeting started perfectly on time. He was super prepared, more prepared than me. And I was like, he's more prepared than me. Maybe I walked in probably like 8:02 and I'm like, oh my God, no. And so that right there, leading by example, setting the example in every way. He said 0 words. He said 0 words to me. I just saw how he acted and lived his life, and I got instantly better. Right. So that's one example. At the time I was working for Carlos Delatorre. And I saw the greatest recruiting I had ever seen in my life. Shooting for the best people, bringing energy and finding out quickly because I was having a hard time recruiting. I was not a good recruiter at that time. I had never even seen what good looked like. And Carlos was so naturally curious about the person, what drives them, what motivates them. So he's having this really fun, energetic conversation. It seems natural, and it is. And he just learned what makes you tick and how he can then talk to you about this opportunity in a way that is customized to mean something to you and hit you in here in your heart and in your brain and make you think you need to go work on his team. Okay, Scott Davis. We went to Medallia because Doug Leone was there, Steve Walski was there, and the company was hot. When we got there, we realized that it had taken 10 years to get to like 25 million ARR. There was no sales process. There was no pricing sheet. There was no messaging. There were 7 people who were on the sales team, all of whom I'm friends with to this day, and love. And we all did amazing things together. But in the beginning, they didn't like Scott or me, maybe me more so. And we were pushing like pipeline generation, cold calling, medic, forecasting. They didn't like any of it. And so we were kind of like butting heads. And I was just thinking, okay, enough. They're kind of undermining us. They're saying, bad things about us. It's already a super hard job. I saw Scott leave his ego at the door and embrace these folks, including one of the people who wrote a scathing multi-page email talking about how terrible I was and Scott was and how the whole thing was never going to work. Scott got that guy to come back, work at the company, because these folks, although I don't believe they had a day of sales training between any of them, they were experts in customer experience. They knew everything. You bring them to a meeting, magic happens. The customers loved them. They knew what they were talking about, and Scott and I didn't know anything about the space. And he embraced them. And in spite of all of that, and we figured out a way to intertwine those two teams. And we built what Steve Walski calls the greatest sales force no one's ever heard of, because it doesn't have like the Datadog or App Dynamics or BladeLogic kind of cachet, but it was absolutely top flight sales organization. It was super hard stuff to sell. And it would never have happened if Scott didn't make that move.
Well, Dan, I think this is the point where we really kind of reflect on what we've spoken today. I think, first of all, it's been a long time coming, and we are really glad that we've been able to kind of bamboozle you and hook you in, even if it was against your will. It has been a profound session. I suppose some of the key takeaways that I've kind of would like to reflect on, and we have covered such an array of topics, is, going back to some of those best practices, some of those best principles around, what is the difference between what great go-to-market and the profound impact it can have, and also in terms of some of the lessons and some of the scars that you've had to go through, but having the right mentors and having the right focus, prioritizing the right things was always what's helped you have the success that you've had. And the priority has always been, can I surround myself with people that I can learn with? And if they're not directly in the organizations I'm working with, you've always seek them out, whether it's consultants or support. And I think that's the reason why you've had the success that you've had, because that North Star has helped you make good choices and given you the great outcomes that you've achieved. So it's been fantastic having you on. I want to say a massive thank you. Long time coming, and looking forward to 5 years down the line when we do this again.
Yeah. Awesome talking with you guys. See you in 5 years.
Yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure. Really appreciate your time, Dan. So to all our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in today. If you've liked what you've heard, please do subscribe to our various channels on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube. All the links will be in the description, and we look forward to welcoming you back for another session very soon. Take care and goodbye.